Going to go ahead and get started. This is the Hazmat refresher class. So anybody that is on the HRF JMD and is in a position that requires just Hazmat awareness, this is the annual requirement to do the refresher. You are supposed to do the full online version of Hazmat awareness first, and then each year after that, this class satisfies the annual requirement for the refresher. Right after this, we'll do the don doff class. So once a year, you're supposed to learn how to don and doff your PPE. And then after that, in room 207 upstairs in the PCRC, we'll do the fit testing for the masks that are required once a year for the Army folks. So we have the list of folks that are logged on. Is there anybody that's listening in with somebody else? Doesn't sound like it. So we've recorded everybody that's logged on. So we'll have your names recorded on the sign-in sheet, and you should be good for the next year. So we'll go ahead and get started with the class. So next slide. So hazardous materials, the definition is basically anything that's dangerous that's not properly contained. So it's typically we see it either in facilities or when the hazardous materials being transported. Next slide. So here are the responsibilities of a hazmat awareness level responder. The other levels of response are hazmat operations, and then the hazmat technician, and there's some above that. So awareness is the first level of hazmat response training. And from a safe location, it's your job to detect or recognize that there's hazardous materials present. Survey the scene and kind of figure out what that hazardous material is. Collect hazard information from the emergency response guidebook, and then implement protective actions. So those are things like making sure people don't go into the area or informing people to get out of the area. Okay, and it's also your job to call for help. So once you call for help, you're really not supposed to do a whole lot more. You're not supposed to enter the hazard area or do anything like that. Next slide. So whenever you're anywhere near hazardous materials, the main thing you want to do is stay out of the hazmat. So you never want to eat, smoke, drink around the hazardous materials. And you want to make sure you decontaminate yourself if you've been in an area anywhere near hazmat. You want to make sure that you have the proper protective equipment because conditions change quite often. And even as awareness level personnel, we want to have defensive protective clothing. And the most important thing is to be safe, right? Next slide. So the Department of Transportation hazard classes are up here. This is something that you reviewed in depth during your initial online class. So this is just kind of a reminder that these placards and the different types of hazards are here. Gives you an idea of what they are. Next slide. During our response, once you identify that there's a hazardous material present, really the guide that tells you what to do is the emergency response guidebook. So we're going to review the guidebook now and describe how to use it. In the channel that you logged on, there's a PDF version, the 2020 version. So if you want to look at that and kind of follow along, you can. And there's also an app you can download and have it on your phone. So you're more likely to carry it with you and have it available that way. Here in the classroom, we have the 2016 version that's very similar, and we're going to use that to go through the class. Okay, next slide. So here's what the ERG looks like. Next slide. If you look on the very first page, page 1 of the ERG, there's a flow chart that describes how to use the book. So in general, there's different colored pages. There's white pages at the beginning, yellow pages and blue pages to figure out what the material is. There's orange pages that tell you what to do. And there's green pages that tell you how far to evacuate if it's a inhalation hazard. So in general, as you follow the flow chart, the first thing that you want to do is figure out what it is. And you can do that multiple ways. If it's a truck or something like that that's placarded, sometimes it'll have a UN number, which is a 4-digit number. And so if you can see that or know that, you want to use the yellow colored pages. If you know the name of the material, maybe it's on shipping papers or it's written on the side of the truck, or the truck driver evacuated and you're talking to him and he knows that it's methanol or something like that. You use the blue colored pages to find that. If you don't know anything, or if you just see an image of the placard and don't know the number, then you can go in the white colored pages. They have images of the placards that kind of tell you how to go through those. And in my book, it's on page 8 and 9. And then if you see a rail car or road trailer, they have images of those on the following pages 10, 11, 12, 13, and the white colored pages. And that you can use those to find out what the guide number is. If you go back to the flow chart on page 1, the main thing you want to do is determine what the guide number is. And that's basically the orange colored page that tells you what to do. So once you find that, you want to see if the material is highlighted in green, and you want to know if the material is on fire. So if you look it up in the yellow colored pages or the blue colored pages, some of those are highlighted in green, and that means that it's a toxic inhalation hazard. So as an example, if you look up chlorine in here, so if you know the name, what colored pages do you go to?
If you know the name, go to the yellow pages.
No. The blue colored pages, right?
Yeah.
So if you know the name, you go to the blue colored pages. So go to the blue colored pages and the name is alphabetically, you go through it. So go and find chlorine. Okay, so page 105, kind of in the bottom right corner. So it's highlighted in green, right? The guide number is 124. And we're going to say that the material is not on fire. So if you look at the little flow chart on page 1, if the material is on fire, you go to the orange colored pages first. If the material isn't on fire, you go to the green colored pages first. So if it's on fire, it's more dangerous, and they want you to go to the orange colored pages first. If it's not on fire, the most dangerous thing is the inhalation hazard. So that's why they tell you to go to the green colored pages. So we're going to say it's not on fire. So what colored pages do you go to?
The green pages. Not on fire. Go to the green pages.
That's correct. So it's not on fire, so you go to the green colored pages. So the green colored pages, if you look at those are organized by the UN number. So if you remember chlorine on page 105, it listed the UN number. So it's 1017 for chlorine. So you look up chlorine by 1017. And so basically chlorine, it says first isolate in all directions, and it says 60 meters. So if there's say a truck that's leaking chlorine, the first thing you want to do is get everybody at least 60 meters away from that truck. And as you go down, see that there's both small spills and large spills. So a small spill is like a 55-gallon drum or smaller, and a large spill is a truck. So as you go across to chlorine, it says it's a large spill, right? Because it's a truck, it's bigger than a 55-gallon drum. So it says refer to table 3. So table 3 is further back in the book, and it's for the materials that are more common. They basically break it down in more detail what you have to do. So if you flip back to table 3, it basically breaks it down to the different types of containers and whether it's day or night and how much wind there is. So it says for a highway tank truck or trailer, since it's so large, you first isolate in all directions for 600 meters or 2,000 feet. So it's a pretty big evacuation area. Chlorine is pretty nasty. So that's the first thing you want to do. So immediately you see 60 and you get everybody at least 60 meters away. And as you look at this book more, you realize, oh, we need to go, it's a pretty big truck, so we need to go 600 meters away. And that takes a lot of effort. Like that would be multiple like intersections in a city. It would take a lot of people and a lot of resources. And that tells you if you're close enough to see the placards and that kind of thing, you're most likely too close. And that tells you you need to get back way up. So as you go through this, let's say it's day, and around here there isn't much wind. So it says during the day and low wind, less from 6 miles per hour and less, it's 5.8 kilometers is the downwind distance. So we're basically, if you go to the next slide. So here's the isolation and protection distances. And so you see the circle in the middle, that's the initial isolation distance. So at first we said 60 meters, and then as we looked more closely, it said 600 meters, right? So first you get everybody out of the 600 meters, and then see in the middle of the square, it says the downwind distance. So that's the 5.8 kilometers. So that's the downwind distance because the wind is going to push the gas downwind. So you're going to go 5.8 kilometers downwind and then half the downwind distance on either side. So basically you're going to make a square that's 5.8 kilometers long and 5.8 kilometers wide downwind from where the truck started leaking. And so that's how you determine the area that you have to evacuate. If you use the app, you can mark where the location is and put this information in, and it'll do a little overlay on the map in there, and it works fairly quickly, and it's much easier than doing all this math and looking everything up in the charts. So that's how you figure out how to use the green pages. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, go back one. So here's the green colored pages. It's for those things that are a gas and they're a toxic inhalation hazard. The next page is the orange page. So when we looked up chlorine, what did it say for the orange colored pages? So the guide is guide 124. So if we go to guide 124 in the orange colored pages, this is what kind of describes all of the things you need to do at that incident site. So the first thing is get everybody out of the evacuation area, which is what we just figured out with the green colored pages. And then the guide page puts the most important thing up front. So the first thing it says on the page is toxic, may be fatal if inhaled or absorbed through the skin. So that's the most important thing to know. And as you go down, it basically talks about the hazards, what's dangerous if there's a fire or explosion. It talks about the public safety portion. Basically, you want to call for emergency response, keep people out of the area, stay upwind, uphill, or upstream. Gases are heavier than air, and they spread along the ground. So stay away from like ditches and basements and that kind of thing. It talks about protective clothing. You got to wear SCBA. It talks about evacuation distances. And on the other side, it talks about fires, what to do for spills or leaks, and what to do for first aid. So this is where you want to look to find out what you will initially do during an incident. So that's pretty much for the ERG. Does anybody have any questions? Okay. Next slide. So there are other resources that you can use. The other one is the NIOSH Pocket Guide, and that's important for us in the HRF because we use air purifying respirators. We can't enter areas that are immediately dangerous to life and health. We can't enter IDLH conditions. And basically the Pocket Guide tells us what those conditions are. On the Teams channel is a PDF version of it. It's the gray book for those of us in the classroom. And if you look up chlorine, you can see all of the chemical properties of chlorine and the levels. So if you look up chlorine and that, it gives all the things like the chemical properties, what type of respirators you're supposed to use, a lot of those type things. But if you look in the upper right-hand corner of the block that has chlorine in it, it says the IDLH level. So for chlorine, the IDLH is 10 parts per million. So when we're using an air purifying respirator, we can't go in conditions above 10 parts per million. If it's above 10 parts per million, only the folks that have an SCBA can go into those areas. So that's what you use the NIOSH Pocket Guide for. Okay. And you can download this as an app on your phone too. So you're more likely to carry that way. There's some other apps like the Wiser app. When we get NG Sims, we'll have some information that way. And the CST and the J2 shop are also good resources to use. Next slide. So as a hazmat awareness responder, first we want to analyze the incident like we just did, and then we want to implement protective actions. So we want to be able to detect the presence of hazardous materials from a location, look and try and figure out what it is through placards or the types of vehicles or containers. We want to use the ERG to determine what we need to do, and then initiate protective action. So those are things like setting up a cordon and telling people they can't go into that area, or signaling to people that they need to move out of that area, or letting them know that they need to shelter in place. And then we need to initiate the notification process, which is basically calling for help. So since we can't go into that area, as awareness level responders, we always have to call for help. Next slide. So when we start talking about detection, initially we don't walk around with chemical detection equipment on or radiation meters or anything like that. So we kind of have to use our senses to figure out that there's something bad going on. So things like an odor, sights or sounds, or informal methods, like if you see a bunch of dead birds laying around, or a really loud hissing noise if you're around a big container, some of those type things. So you never want to get quite as close as the guy sniffing at the barrel, though. Next slide. So you never want to get so close that you put yourself at risk. So as soon as your spidey senses start tingling and something bad's going on, that's when you want to start backing off and making sure you keep yourself and your team and the people you're protecting safe. So many gases are odorless, colorless, and tasteless, and that goes for radiation too. You can't feel, taste, see, or touch radiation. So we always have to use other methods to determine that a lot of those things are there. Next slide. So there's 3 primary routes of entry for hazardous materials. So this is how they can get into your body and hurt you through contact or absorption. So through your skin, through inhalation, which is the main hazard, and through ingestion. So if you somehow eat it or get it inside your body. There's others, but these are the 3 main ones. And the way we protect ourselves from this is through wearing PPE. Next slide. So the PPE that were issued in the HRF, for the HRF C2 folks, we are assigned an M50 mask and a JS-less suit. So that's our assigned equipment. The foreshop has that stuff on hand, and during a response would issue it out. We have MOIs with some units that would turn over M50 masks to us, and they would be issued out, and that's what we would take out to incident sites. Some of the response elements that are hazmat operations trained have red bags. So they have level C, they have poppers, and they have different types of suits that they use to respond that are made more for the people that deliberately go into the hot zone that are hazmat operations trained. Okay, next slide. So we wear a popper, which is a commercially provided mask. And it can be worn in a couple different ways. On the left there, you see a popper. Notice it has a bigger view screen. And it has a screw-on filter. It's a little bit easier to breathe through than an M50 mask or any of the military masks we have. And over on the right, you see an S&E person, search and extraction. So they're wearing a popper. And you can't quite see it, but there's a hose that goes to a unit that they wear around their waist, and it's a battery powered blower with 2 filters attached to it. So it's a positive pressure mask. So there's constantly air being pushed in there. So you want the mask on the left is negative pressure. You have to suck the air through the filter with your lungs. And the seal is more important that way. The one on the right, the way it's configured with the blower and the battery pack, it's less likely to leak because it has positive pressure inside the mask. And it doesn't wear the guy out as much because they don't have to suck the air through the filters. They can be in those suits much longer. The MT94 extractor suit is almost like bunker gear since they're crawling through rubble piles and all that. It's very abrasion resistant, and it's just a tougher suit. Next slide. Most of the red bags, like the decon element, the case, those folks have this new suit called the blower suit. The reason the blower suit is nice is because it has a seal around the mask. So there's a rubber gasket. So they don't have to tape around the mask like we do with the old suits. The material is a little bit breathable, so it protects against chemical hazards, but it also lets moisture and heat out a little bit better. It's got a sealing zipper that goes across the front and a better flap, so they really don't have to tape that either. And the boots and the gloves are built into the suit, so they don't have to tape around their hands or their feet either. Because it can be decontaminated and reused, they don't have to carry as many of them, so it makes the logistics requirements lower. So overall, it's a very good suit, and it's quite honestly, it's just more comfortable to wear. Okay, next slide. So we talked about the PAPR. So the PAPR that the case and all the Surf P guys use, and 22 people from the ground support element have red bags. They're all air purifying respirators, and the M50 masks are too. So it's not a supplied air bottle like the SCBA that the CST uses. There's some benefits to it. They you don't have to worry about running out of air. It's lighter. They can work in it longer, about 4 hours, depending on the temperature and humidity conditions. But it does have some limitations too. So a PAPR, an air purifying respirator, has to have 3 things to operate in those conditions. You have to have at least 19.5% oxygen. It has to be below the IDLH conditions. And the filter on the mask has to be compatible with the hazard. There's some chemicals that you just can't use. Some of the blood agents, you can't use a filter in those conditions, even if they're below IDLH. Whenever we put on any of these masks, we need to clear and test the seal each time you put the mask on. We taught that in basic training, and so you might do it without thinking about it, but you're taught to do that. You have to conduct a fit test once a year with your assigned make, model, size, and style of mask. And you have to do a donned off class with the equipment you're assigned once a year. So we'll do that right after this. So those are the requirements to be able to use this equipment. Next slide. So now we're going to talk about the detection equipment that the HRF uses. So first we'll talk about the different types of radiation equipment. So there's radiation dosimeters that tell you the dose people are receiving. There's survey equipment that you use to see if something's clean or not. And then there's mass detection equipment. like the rad portable and area array. Next slide. So the main dosimeter that we use is the PDR 75 alpha and the DT 236 alpha rad watch. So we basically the box that you see there is the reader, and the little watch you see on the bottom right is what is issued to each service member. You have to read the reading on the watch at the beginning of the shift. And then when they come back out of the hot zone, you put it in the reader again and record the difference. And that tells you the dose they received that day. You wear it around your dominant hand. And so that's entered in the dosimetry program. And typically the decon element manages all the dosimeters. So they, I believe, have them all. The problem with the rad watch is that it won't tell you what your radiation dose is while you're working at the site. So that's why we use the UDR13 over on the right. It's a little device, almost the size of a pager, if you remember what those are. And it gives you feedback right away on what the dose and dose rate is. You can set alarms on it for dose and dose rate. So if you go into an area that's really hot, it'll tell you right away. And if you go over like sometimes you'll have a turn back dose. So say the S&E is going into a hot area. The radiation dose limit might be 5 centigrade for the day. And so they might set their turn back dose at 2.5. So once they hit 2.5, that means it's time to turn around and leave the area. So they can set an alarm for 2.5 centigrade. It only detects gamma and neutron radiation. It doesn't detect beta radiation. And it uses a weird battery. It uses 4 AAA batteries. So on the logistics side, we just got to make sure we have the right equipment, the right batteries for that. Usually they're issued 1 per squad or 1 per team. Next slide. So the survey equipment that we have the DDR2, uses another weird battery, a 9-volt battery. And it detects gamma and beta radiation. There's a little shield on it that flips down. So when that shield is down, it only detects gamma. And when you flip the shield up, it detects both gamma and beta. So it's a way to tell if it's one or the other. But basically, if you go into an area and want to know where the contamination is, the decon element uses these to see if patients are clean or not. So it's that type of survey equipment. The PDR 77 is very similar, but it has more different types of probes that you can connect. So it also detects X-ray and alpha radiation. It has a big round sensor you can see in the case there that it's a very big sensor, and it's an X-ray probe, and it's very sensitive. So you can use that to find lower levels of radiation and from further away. The little square sensor on the right detects alpha radiation. Alpha radiation is a very dangerous internal hazard, but it doesn't go very far. It only goes like an inch or less. So you can use that square probe, but you have to get it really close to whatever you're reading, and it's really hard to find alpha radiation. So this is one of the few pieces of survey equipment we have that detects alpha. Next slide. So the decon element has 3 of these radiation portals. It's a very expensive piece of equipment, and it's got a huge crystal in it. It's a huge sensor, and it's very sensitive. You can only use it in limited limited areas, if the background radiation is too high, it's not effective. So in a scenario like a meltdown at a nuclear plant where there's lower radiation, or like a accident, like a nuclear weapons accident, this would be very effective. But if it were like someplace where a nuclear detonation occurred, it most likely wouldn't be effective unless it was far away from the site. But we can put this out. You know, oftentimes many of the casualties are worried they might be contaminated, but really don't know. And most of them aren't contaminated and don't require decontamination. We can put this out at the front of the decon line, and the people that we don't detect any radiation can bypass decon. So it's a way to really reduce our impact and requirements for decon. It's big enough that you can set it up to survey vehicles too, as you can see there. It's really a very valuable resource we have. Next slide. So now we'll talk about chemical detection equipment. Typically, you kind of break it down into gases or liquids and solids. So go to the next slide. So the JCAD is the most typical one that you'll see. It can be used in two configurations. It can be used as an area monitor. Basically, you can set it out and it'll alarm if it detects nerve, blister, or toxic industrial chemicals. There's a sound that it makes, and there's a little light on the top of it that flashes. You can add a cap to it. On the right, you see that cap, and you can use it as a point monitor. So like decon would use that to determine if a patient is clean or not. There's also a little kit where you can put it in a little mount, and with radio wire, you can wire an alarm and set it forward of the position upwind that'll alarm you if there's any detections. It uses 4 AA batteries. And the thing that most often goes bad in it, there's a sieve pack, like a filter. And you often, if it isn't working properly, it's often because of the sieve pack. Next slide. So the M256 kit is like a mini chemistry kit. It's the one that's in the middle there. And it's mostly for chemical vapors. So you basically go through the instructions and crush different ampules and stuff like that. And if certain things turn certain colors, it'll tell you what the chemicals are. The M8 paper is over on the right-hand side at the top. And basically that's more for a liquid chemical. You touch it to the liquid, and the paper will turn colors and tell you what the agent is. So you can see the legend there. It's either G, H, or B agents. So either nerve or blister agents. And then the M9 paper is an adhesive paper you put like on your leg or your arm or on a vehicle that changes color also. There's the clue. Next slide. The area array is one of the better pieces of equipment that we have, and it does multiple things. So it's got 5 different sensors in it. One is gamma radiation. It detects volatile organic compounds. It'll tell you the lower explosive limit for combustible gases. It'll tell you the oxygen percent. So that's really important since we use air purifying respirators. So we know if we're above that 19.5% oxygen that we need. And then there's one gas sensor in there that we can switch out. I think it comes with hydrogen sulfide as the sensor, but we can get different plugins. So in the top middle, that's an ammonia cartridge, but we can open it up and change those out. Say it was chlorine, we could order chlorine ones. The CSTs have a stock of these sensors. that they carry with them. We don't. We just have what's currently in it, but we can order others if we need it. The nice thing about the area arrays is you can set them out and they transmit back to a laptop, and you can network them and they give you information. The box that you see on the bottom has 4 different sensors in it. And I think most of the elements have 3 or 4 boxes of those sensors. So it's really easy to take it and put it out. There's a little flashy light on the top of it, an alarm that goes off also. So if you're nearby, you can see when it's alarming. Next slide. So here's just kind of an overview of how the HRF is set up. So the brigade is up there at the top, the 160 packs. So that's us. We're assigned the JS list and the M50 for our PPE. There's the case element over on the far left, and that they're assigned the red bags. They're hazmat operations trained, are supposed to be, and they wear the blower suits and have the red bags with the poppers. As you look at the SURF P in the middle, they have a C2 that's outfitted with red bags, but they're just hazmat awareness trained. And then the other elements down below them all have red bags, poppers, and different types of suits depending on their mission. Okay, next slide. So we're almost done. Here's an overview of the SURF P footprint. So the near tents are the medical element. And then as you go out, and they're in the clean zone. As you go further up, you'll see a line across the middle that's a piece of plastic that's down. And that's the line that divides the clean zone from the hot zone. On the far horizon out there is an orange fence that goes all the way across, and that's the exclusionary line. So the decon element is the line of tents on the right. There's an ambulatory lane and a non-ambulatory lane. And then on the left of the building that's in the middle of the picture is the responder decon or the technical decon. And to the left of that is the equipment decon. So as responders go out, they go down and they check out, and they go out either to the decon element where they're going to work, or if they're S&E and FCERT and the S&E medics, they'll go out past the exclusionary line and work out in the hot zone. As they work, they'll come back. They'll go through the technical or responder decon lane. They'll drop off their equipment. And then they go to the little blue roof tent, which is the check-in, check-out. And so that's where they do their post-entry medical monitoring. If they have a radiation dosimeter, that's where that gets read. And basically, they make sure that they're okay to go back and go to the rest tent and recover. They check things like their weight, their temperature, their blood pressure, those type things to make sure that they're okay after coming out of the hot zone. Kind of down where the plastic is, down the middle, that's the liquid control line and the vapor control line. So everything past the vapor control line is the hot zone. So as patients come in, so they get extracted from the rubble pile beyond the exclusionary line, they'll come back. There's a tent out there, like a pentagon-shaped tent or octagonal tent, and that's the casualty collection point. There's triage medics out there. They'll decide if they're ambulatory, non-ambulatory, and they give them a priority to go through the decon line. Once they've been triaged, they'll go through decon. They basically cut all their clothes off, or they disrobe. They get washed off. They get separated from their personal belongings. And then in the area where the vapor control line, liquid control line are, They basically use the detection equipment to figure out if they're clean or not. Once they're determined to be clean, then they proceed past the vapor control line. And then the last two tents are the redress tents. And then they get passed off to medical, and medical will take them out. So that's largely how the SURF-P footprint works. And that's really where the rubber meets the road as far as our mission goes. Any questions on that? No? All right, next slide. So just kind of a quick review. The main role of awareness level people is to recognize that there's a hazardous material present. You want to protect yourself. You want to figure out what the materials are. Secure the area. And then you want to call for trained personnel. So you don't go in and do offensive actions. You don't enter the hot zone at all. You basically keep people out of it and call for help. All right, I think that's all I have. Does anybody have any additional questions?